Hey everyone and welcome back. So, the Raspberry Pi, huh? This little computer everyone's talking about. We're going to dive deep into that today.
And guys sent in some really fascinating stuff on it.
We're looking at this article, Raspberry Pi, the tiny computer revolutionizing technology. I mean, it really seems like it's everywhere these days.
Right. It's amazing how it's captured people's attention.
So we're going to unpack not just what this thing is, but why it's become such a big deal.
And you know, what's really interesting is how it all started. It wasn't some big tech company trying to create the next, iPhone or something.
It definitely has a different vibe.
This all began with this idea, how do we get more kids into computer science? Make it fun, make it accessible.
I bet they never imagined it would blow up like this, though.
Yeah.
When did it launch? Like 2012?
Yeah, around then.
And now look at it.
Totally. From a classroom experiment to, well, this global phenomenon we're going to talk about.
Okay, so basics for a sec. What is a Raspberry Pi? Like, if I've never seen one, how would you explain it?
Imagine this. A computer you can hold in your hand, not a phone, like a real computer.
And the price is wild. It's like, what, 35 bucks or something?
Yeah, for the basic model, it's insanely affordable.
You plug it into a monitor, just like a regular computer, keyboard, mouse, all that.
And here's where it gets cool. It runs on a Linux-based system. Don't let that scare you off. It's actually very user-friendly.
Okay, so it's like a mini computer, but what can you do with it? That's what I'm curious about.
That's where things get interesting. It can do a lot. And one of the reasons it's so versatile is that it supports a ton of different programming languages.
Yeah, I saw Python, C++, May, Java, like almost everything.
Exactly. So no matter how you like to code, the Raspberry Pi can handle it.
Okay, before we get into all the awesome stuff it can do, let's talk about the latest model, the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, because this thing sounds like a beast. A quad-core processor.
Right, and you can get it with up to 8 GBs of RAM. They really packed a punch into this little thing.
So break that down for me. Why do those specs matter? What's a processor do again?
Okay, so think of the processor like the brain of the operation. It determines how fast your Raspberry Pi can think, basically.
Like how quickly it can do stuff.
Exactly. Now, it's not going to be as powerful as the latest, supercomputer, but for everyday tasks, it's more than enough.
And the RAM, that's like short-term memory.
Exactly. It's how much information your Raspberry Pi can juggle at once. So more RAM means smoother multitasking, more complex applications.
It's wild how much tech they cram into these tiny things. I mean, it has USB ports, HDMI.
Don't forget the built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, because who wants to be tethered to a cable in this day and age?
Amen to that. Okay, so we've covered the fact that it's affordable, it's powerful for its size.
Yeah.
But what makes the Raspberry Pi so special? Why should people care?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I'd say it comes down to a few key things. First, that affordability we talked about. That's huge E.
Yeah, like, it's not just for techies anymore. Anyone can get their hands on this and start experimenting.
Exactly. It removes that financial barrier that prevents so many people from exploring technology and gets it into more hands.
It's like the Raspberry Pi Foundation is saying, hey, you don't need a ton of money to get into tech. Everyone should have the chance to play around and create. It really is amazing what you get for what, like I said, the price of a few lattes. Seriously, it's impressive. But okay, let's dive into what you can actually do with a Raspberry Pi. Because this article you sent, it's got me wanting to build stuff.
Oh yeah, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
So where do we even start? Give me the highlights. What gets people really jazzed about this thing?
Well, one thing that always gets people excited is DIY smart homes. Like imagine controlling everything, your lights, the temperature, even your security system, all through a Raspberry Pi.
Wait, you're saying I could build my own smart home system? From Square Teach H?
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
It might sound kind of intimidating, but the Raspberry Pi makes these complex projects totally doable.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I gotta admit, that sounds a little advanced for me. What about something a bit more nostalgic?
Ah, you must be thinking about retro gaming. That's a classic Raspberry Pi project.
You read my mind. The article mentioned something called RetroPie. What is that exactly? Can I really build like a mini arcade cabinet with a Raspberry Pi?
Absolutely. People have done some incredibly creative things with RetroPie and Raspberry Pi. Like imagine a wall-mounted arcade cabinet running all your favorite classic games, all powered by this little device.
That's so cool. But okay, let's say vintage games aren't really my thing. Can the Raspberry Pi still be like an entertainment hub?
Definitely. With software like Kodi, you can stream movies, music, pretty much anything you can think of.
So I could ditch the expensive streaming services and just use my Raspberry Pi.
Exactly. And with the 4K support on the newer Raspberry Pi models, the picture quality is amazing.
All right, I'm sold. This is going straight to the top of my to-do list. Okay, but we can't forget about robots. Earlier, you mentioned controlling robots with a Raspberry Pi. How does that work?
Oh yeah, robots. It's all about those GPIO pins we talked about earlier. They're the key to connecting your Raspberry Pi to the physical world, motors, sensors, all sorts of things.
So the Raspberry Pi can actually control things moving around in real life.
That's right. People have built all sorts of things, robotic arms that can sort objects, even autonomous vehicles that can navigate a room.
I gotta admit, this is way cooler than I ever imagined. Okay, but let's bring it back down to earth for a sec, literally.
Yeah.
The article also mentioned the Internet of Things, or IoT.
Ah, yes, IoT. So, the Raspberry Pi is a perfect platform for building your own IoT projects because it's so versatile and affordable.
I've heard of IoT, but I'm a little fuzzy on what that actually means. What could we build?
Well, think about things like environmental monitoring systems, tracking air quality, temperature, that sort of thing. Or a smart garden that automatically waters your plants.
A smart garden. That's all. See, this is what I'm talking about. The possibilities seem endless. What about, like, my own weather station?
You could totally build your own weather station with a Raspberry Pi. It's all about connecting sensors, collecting data, and then displaying in a way that makes sense.
Okay, that's it. I need to clear my schedule and get building. Seriously, is there anything this tiny computer can't do?
Well, it's not going to replace your high-end gaming PC anytime soon, but you'd be surprised. For instance, you can even use a Raspberry Pi as a personal web server.
Wait, really? You're telling me I could host my own website on this thing?
That's right. You could host your own website or even a blog, all from a device the size of a credit card.
No more expensive hosting services, huh? Man, I am so on board with this. I'm starting to think I need a whole room dedicated to my Raspberry Pi projects.
You and me both. But in all seriousness, all of this amazing stuff aside, we can't forget the impact the Raspberry Pi has had on education. That was the whole point, after all.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. This device that was designed to help kids learn to code can now power robots, smart homes, and even artificial intelligence projects.
You're not kidding. Even AI is within reach with the Raspberry Pi.
Hold on. Did you just say we can do artificial intelligence on this tiny computer? For real?
It might sound crazy, but it's true. Recent developments in AI, specifically tools like TensorFlow Lite, have made it possible to run some surprisingly sophisticated AI models on the Raspberry Pi.
Like, what kind of AI are we talking about here?
We're talking object detection, speech recognition, even facial recognition, and it's all happening on this little device. It's remarkable.
This is seriously blowing my mind. But okay, I gotta ask. With all this incredible power and potential, there have to be some downsides, right? I mean, it can't all be good, right?
Yeah.
What are the downsides? What are the trade-offs with using a Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, you're right. It's not a magic bullet. It has its limitations. For one thing, the processing power. Even though the Raspberry Pi 4 is impressive, it's not going to be as powerful as like a high-end desktop computer that you'd use for, video editing or gaming, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. You can only cram so much into a device that small. What about storage space? That's always an issue with computers.
Good point. The Raspberry Pi uses those micro SD cards for storage. And while they're great for a lot of things, they can be slower than, say, an SSD drive, especially if you're working with really large files.
So if I'm doing a project with a ton of data, that could be a bottleneck.
Potentially, yeah. It's something to keep in mind. And then the other thing, and this is true for anything really, but especially when you're getting started with something like Raspberry Pi, there's a learning curve.
Yeah, it's easy to get excited about all the possibilities and forget that you actually have to, learn how to do this stuff.
Exactly. It's not like you can just plug it in and you're instantly building robots. You'll need some basic programming skills, understanding of how Linux works, that sort of thing.
But hey, that's part of the fun, right? Figuring it out, learning as you go.
Absolutely. That's what the Raspberry Pi is all about. It's not just a gadget, it's a gateway. It's about empowering people to become creators, not just consumers.
It's like giving someone a toolbox instead of just a finished product, right? They get to build something themselves.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe someday we'll be doing a deep dive on something amazing that you created with a Raspberry Pi.
I love that. All right, well, on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the Raspberry Pi. Big thanks to you for all the insights. This has been seriously eye-opening.
My pleasure. It's always fun to geek out about the Raspberry Pi.
For sure. And to everyone listening, we'll catch you next time for another deep dive. Until then, happy tinkering.